Welcome to Our Relationship with Writing. I am KT Carlisle,
And I'm Anthony Lafusi.
and today we are going to talk about first lines and first chapters.
Yes.
And this is something that I actually, because they just did First Line Pit on Twitter like a couple months
Yeah,
ago.
it wasn't too long.
It wasn't too long ago. And I saw a lot of really great first lines.
Yeah.
And I also saw some things that
Trash lines.
no,
Worst lines ever. Garbage
no,
lines.
I didn't say it.
First
You said
draft
it.
material lines.
Well, that's a fair way to
That
put
is a
it.
fair way to
Yeah,
put it.
first draft
That's
material.
fair.
Yes,
I'm not,
first
yeah,
draft
obviously
material.
we're kidding. But
That
yeah,
was good.
first draft material,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. So let's dive in to what makes a good first line,
Okay.
first chapter
Okay.
versus what needs a little extra love. Before I even get started on this, I just want to preface this is like I'm gonna get into some things, and there are like two takes that I have on it. One are like things you should avoid this if you're going to query. On the flip side of that, though, if you're like a self-published author and you're gonna go your own route and you're not gonna do the traditional thing, I say go for these things because honestly, like what the like five cliches to avoid, that's what we're gonna like get into in a little bit.
Yeah.
Those things, it's so subjective. But anyway, I'm jumping ahead of
You are
myself.
jumping
What
ahead.
am I doing? What am
are
I
you
doing?
Jumping ahead.
I have coffee. I think what's most important in a first line, especially, is to have tension, some kind of tension or stakes presented.
Okay.
Definitely like, a powerful voice, and you want to be able to set the tone for the story.
Okay.
You know?
Okay.
And
I see that.
yeah.
There are a lot of things that people don't want you to do. There are a lot of what not to do.
Yeah.
And that like basically what you said is the general consensus of what to do.
Yeah.
I think something you didn't really say is just like to be interesting.
Oh, absolutely.
Like just be interesting
yeah,
in
and
some
I
way.
think that combination of things though
Yeah.
is what makes it interesting.
I don't
That's
know.
what's gonna like
Yeah,
you want to have a strong hook.
yeah. Well, it is very it's strange. Like obviously the potential is limitless. You can start a story anywhere. It can be anything from it was a dark and stormy night, which some people don't love.
Yeah.
To like the last time I was set on fire, and then it's like, whoa, wait,
Whoa,
what? And that's
are we
interesting.
writing this story?
Now here's the thing. I just like made that up just now, but it sounds like it would be an interesting beginning to a story. Now, does the story have to be about a person on fire the entire time? No, but it's obviously about a person, and they're going to tell you about their tumultuous past in that moment.
And I'm gonna like contradict myself a little bit here because I said that you should have like all three of these things, but I don't even think that all three are necessary in the first line. Maybe in the first chapter as a whole, absolutely you want those combination of things, but in the first line, I think having just one of those is enough if it's interesting enough. Yeah, like what you just said.
I think it's so odd. A lot of these things that we're going to be talking about, and I'm sure a lot of the things that our fellow writers face, they're frustrating, in their like in their absolutism, like it feels like didactic, or it feels like people. It's like there's some sort of like I don't know, like an evil overlord writer, that's just like you must do it this way or else.
No.
Yeah, and
it's Stephen King,
and it's just Stephen King. So it's so like when I hear these things, I'm like, yes, but
exactly,
but because like I can't help but to think like how many stories do start with just like a simple like humble beginning of just like and okay, so that with that being said, before we get too much into it, let's talk about what can we do the what not to do, like what the 5 lists, so we can list them for the people, because of course that's something that we're going to be talking about. So there are all these very specific rules about what you're not supposed to do, and of course they have good reason for some of them.
Well, and some of them are very good pointers, like info dumping. You don't want to just like lay a whole lot of information on the reader all at once and like just get so granular with your characters, like, oh, so and so woke up this morning and brushed his auburn hair out of his green eyes and went to his bedroom, which was very rustic and set in the Adirondacks. Like, no, we don't need to know all that. That's stuff that you can sprinkle in and layer on later in the story. But and on top of that, and this is one of those things though, info dumping, avoid it. in the beginning, and also like I would argue everywhere in your story. But also dialogue is one of those things
Like,
that
don't
people say
start.
don't start a story with dialogue.
Yeah.
But
Depends on the
it
story.
really does depend on
It
the
depends on the story, depends on your tone. But that's the hardest thing about being a writer and
Yeah,
talking about writing, because something it's it's also subjective, and like what's right for your story may not be right for my story. I
exactly.
mean, for instance, one of them is don't have the character waking up
Yes.
in general.
And you have a very specific, well, we both actually have
Yeah.
specific
So
experiences
yeah,
with
so
that.
what was yours? So okay, wait, before we get into that, so one of the rules is just not to have your character waking up in the
Hmm.
beginning. It's a cliche. It's a trope that's tried and true. But how did you find yourself writing that cliche, and like how do you feel about it?
I felt really good about it.
Yeah,
And I was advised multiple times, don't start your story this way.
yeah,
And I considered that, but because it was such an integral part of the story, and it comes back time and time again throughout the story, I felt very strongly that it needed to begin this way.
yeah,
And so I kept it. And honestly, it got me passed over by several agents. I've had that story in the hand. I had a publishing deal for it. I had,
yeah.
many agents looking at the full manuscript and everything. And one agent came back and rejected me solely based on the fact that that is how I chose to open up my story. She had nothing else negative to say about it.
Yeah, I find that to be so absurd.
I
And
thought it was
and
too. I mean, I get it because I to a certain degree I get it, and to a certain degree I think
yeah,
it's absolutely, like you said, it's absurd.
it's absurd. Yeah, I
But
mean,
you have to
good.
keep in mind that these are people who are going through, they're fielding thousands of
Right,
queries every month.
right.
Um, so they have to go with things that are new and fresh and interesting.
Mhm.
And that's not to say that, I certainly would consider my story new and fresh and
Yeah,
interesting, despite the fact that it starts out with a trope or a cliche, whatever,
yeah,
however you want to say it. But
yeah,
the sad fact of the matter is that so many great stories
yeah.
like mine, no, so many great stories do get passed up for silly reasons like that. So if you are serious about querying, and that is something that you're interested to do in doing, is getting an agent, then you might want to consider how your story starts, and consider avoiding those kinds of tropes.
Gosh, I find it, like I absolutely understand why you say that and why they say that,
Yeah.
but I also think that it's creating a situation in which they're attempting to avoid a potential cookie cutter, but they're creating their own cookie cutter.
I
So
Yeah.
now what they're doing is they're saying you can't have this anymore because it's a trope that we recognize, but what they're doing is they're forcing you to avoid a thing that would be a fantastic topping on
Oh
some
yeah.
cookies.
Oh yeah,
You
oh,
know what I mean? Like, like
absolutely. Like
some.
I saw an agent once, and this is actually one of these tropes, is running away. Like you can't start a story with a character being chased or running away from something. And I saw an agent literally state in her manuscript wish list that if a story begins this way, it's an automatic pass from her.
Yeah, and you want to know what my favorite movie of the year was?
What was your favorite movie of the year?
Strange Darling.
I know, and that's
And you want to know how
exactly
it
how it
starts?
starts.
With a
No
character,
spoilers,
no
Anthony.
spoilers, but I'll tell you that like the character running away and opening the movie that way was the smartest, best thing they could
Oh,
have
I
done.
thought so, yeah.
Everything worked so well. It was a beautifully constructed narrative,
Oh
and
yeah.
like if you haven't seen that movie, go watch that movie because like
100%.
any writer can learn from the way that they moved around those puzzle pieces.
Narratively, and like the way that whole movie was laid out
It was
is
excellent.
brilliant.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant.
And begins with this trope that would have you rejected by so many
Oh
agents and
yeah.
publishers and such.
Yeah.
And I just like, I know, not that it's so strange to talk about this stuff because like I hate disagreeing with them. But I guess our whole point is if you are going this route, you have to be aware of these things.
Yeah, you have to consider it, because, and it's not to say that for like I just said, that book that I mentioned, it did get a publishing deal.
Yeah.
I was, offered it. I ultimately passed on it because this is another important thing to keep in mind is, know your worth. Consider what they're offering you and understand what the terms are, and if those terms aren't agreeable to you, um take a chance on yourself.
Yeah.
You can do better than that, and don't just
100%.
settle for the first thing that comes your way.
Yeah, that's very fair. I mean, you mentioned the like pitch contests and such on Twitter before,
Yeah,
and it's just like it's so exciting when anyone likes your pitch
100%.
on one of those, or anytime you get any sort of attention from anyone who is an agent or a publisher of any sort,
Yeah.
your heart kind of flutters. You're like, this is exactly
Yeah.
it. This is my dream. I am
This is
on, like,
happening.
yeah, like you feel, you're like, oh my gosh, the ruby slippers are on my feet. I am the god, like I
Yes.
did it. I freaking did it. I've ascended. But you have to, of course, be reasonable and recognize like the level of commitment with various places, and like if they're the sort of publisher that you want to go with, or the sort of agent
Exactly.
that would actually that you'd benefit from in some way
Yeah.
as a writer. And
So if you're querying your book and you're, like me, and you were really confident in starting it with one of these tropes, um, stick to your guns. And,
yeah,
if they come back, if many, many people are coming back and saying, citing this as a reason, it might, and you're very serious, this is what you want, you might want to consider, reorganizing your story
yeah,
and taking that. But at the same time,
if it's something that's integral to the story and you
yeah,
feel that it's the right way to tell the story. Like for instance, my story.
yeah,
Okay, so my book, Table Scraps, it began with a character waking up on a morgue bed after dying. So
right.
being introduced to this whole new afterlife, and I thought it was a fun
I think that
way
that's a
to
very fun way. I do like the new beginning.
yeah.
It is very good.
But I similarly, I read about how this trope was hated among agents and such, and I was actually looking towards submitting to a particular agent, and I saw that he complained about getting so many of these, and I was like, okay, I can rework it so that wake up scene still happens
Yeah,
and it's still effective, but it happens a little bit later. So I kind
yeah.
of cheated it.
Well, that's a good point too, because as some of you might know, we do KTA editorial on the side, and one of our clients, their story did start with a dream sequence, the character waking from a dream. And I brought that to their attention
Yeah,
and told them, like, hey, if you restructure it this way, you don't have to get rid of this, but if you just make this chapter two
yeah.
and switch it, and then have your story start in this different way,
Mhm.
you might have a better chance at
Yeah.
getting an agent's attention. And now she has an offer on the table and has 12 fulls still out. So she's gonna start bidding more, that girl.
100%. No, that's wonderful. And of course, everyone, like, I'm sure just like me, there are a lot of people who would watch this and just start groaning and be like, I hate having to do that.
I know.
And I hate having to do that. I'm the worst. That's why I don't go through any of that stuff. I can't bring myself to do it. Like I did it one time and I hated it. But you're right. I changed mine. And what I did was I essentially created like a little prologue that works as a chapter one.
It is. It's a really
Um,
good prologue
yeah, it's a
slash
little
chapter one.
yeah, it works as chapter one, and I tried to cheat that system because I wanted to open my book that way. I really
Yeah.
liked it, but of course, unfortunately, we're stuck working within this a specific structure that
Right.
has a certain prejudice that
A
I disagree
cookie
with.
cutter within a cookie
Cookie
cutter.
cutter. Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, and it's frustrating, but you know what? If that's what it takes to get the attention of the agents, and then perhaps you can rework the story once you have
Right.
the agents anyway.
Well,
Depending on
yeah.
the situation.
And I think what's helpful too is when you know what not to do, it kind of makes it a little easier to understand, okay, well, how this is where I'm
Yeah,
going to start. So, in our first episode, we talked about,
yeah,
getting started and how difficult that can be.
yeah.
And sometimes, you might think that you have this great idea of how to start,
Right.
but if it's one of these five things, then it can, change the trajectory of your story altogether. So it's good to have that in mind.
Absolutely. I mean, and sometimes, and I know, like we all like to we're here to express ourselves
Yeah.
limitlessly, like
Yes.
forever. Get out of my face. But the truth is, absolute freedom can be stifling in many ways.
Yeah.
So you can sit there and be like, oh no, what can I do?
Totally.
And then you'll go through these five, be like, which of these five should open my story? And you're just like, I could be any of them. But
Mhm.
like having some set structure and recognizing that, like, hey, if I have some set rules where I have to avoid these five things, it does kind of create a bit of a structure that you have to think creatively outside of that, and
Yes.
it forces creativity in the same way that like poetry does,
Yeah.
in the same way that like if you're writing a haiku, you're not totally free because you're stuck within the parameters of a specific syllabic
Right.
pattern.
Right.
And in doing that you have to express yourself as creatively as you can within that structure. Similarly, when you have these sort of rules or restrictions, you have to find a way to find that creativity in yourself, and it can be beneficial.
Yeah. 100%. So we talked a lot about the waking up. We did touch on the running away. The other three are looking in a mirror.
Oof. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of stories begin this way, and I think what the intention here sometimes is to ground the reader in what the main character
Yeah.
looks like. And that can be an effective tool
Sure.
looking in the mirror elsewhere in the story, but right up front it is a little bit on the nose
Yeah.
sometimes,
Yeah. You know what though? Like,
unless that mirror has some kind of like magic
I was gonna
powers.
say, unless it's a magic mirror, unless what about this? You open the story describing what you see in a mirror, but you don't mention yourself because you're a vampire and you don't cast a reflection.
Ooh, yeah. See,
You know?
this of
Like,
course that would be your go-to because
yeah,
you are the vampire
I,
king.
I do like vampires.
Yeah,
But
dude.
But just all that to say, like, there are always going to be
There's
exceptions. There are
always
always
an
going to be something
exception.
that like would be interesting to people, and I think that goes back to what we were saying about first lines. As
Yeah.
long as it's interesting and it hooks an audience. You know, if
Yes.
that's you or if that's whatever specific reader you have in mind. I think you just stick with what you believe. Will work to hook that person.
Totally.
You know,
Yeah.
but
Like one of the other tropes that they say to avoid is don't start a story out with the character traveling. Well, I'm working on a book right now, and the whole premise, is hinged
yeah,
upon this character traveling, and this
yeah,
happens right in the beginning of the story.
yeah.
And then this crazy person comes up to her and is like, "Hey, I saw you in a dream, and your plane's about to crash, so very Final Destination-y." So if I don't have the story start that way, then what is the story even about?
Well, there are times, such as in your case, where if you don't start the story that way, it's only to service the people who don't want you to start the
One
story that
thousand
way. So
percent.
you're not servicing the reader, you're not servicing the story itself. You're literally just catering to an audience of
Exactly.
of the agents, which is
Yes.
super unfortunate because you're really doing damage to the narrative itself,
Yeah.
and you're really wasting the time of the reader in such a way. And of course, you can do it in a way that's like beneficial to the story overall, but it's not the best way to tell the story,
Right.
and you know that.
Oh God,
You
yeah.
know?
Well, I like that you said that because I think that something that a lot of writers forget to do is to trust their own instincts
Yeah.
about their story. They get really wrapped up in, is the agent gonna like this? Or if they're not planning on querying, many will just get wrapped up, is this gonna sell? Are readers gonna like this? And
Yeah. Yeah.
why don't we take a step back
Mhm.
and write the story for ourselves, because at the end of the day, writing is a very individual activity,
Yeah.
and it's something that a lot of us find healing. We turn to writing not because it's something that we think is going to make us money or make us famous, but it's something that we just inherently love. So
Yeah.
if we get back to that and write the story that's in our heart, then you're going to have a lot happier of a time actually writing that story.
Absolutely. And at least in my experience, people are way more likely to, connect with the
Yeah.
writing through that. And
Right.
that goes back to the write what you know situation. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, that doesn't just mean life experience, but like,
Yeah.
emotional, mental, physical, philosophical,
Yeah.
like what you know inside, and like,
Yeah.
and sometimes that just means the tone of your dang story and you know how to start,
100%.
you know. So
Totally.
I'm with you. I think writers should trust themselves more often and not always
Yeah.
listen to these situations. However, it is important to look at
Yeah.
them when you are thinking about querying, which is what we're talking about. So we're on both sides. We totally
Yeah.
understand, but we neither of us are interested
Well,
in
because
playing that particular
we're
game
both
anymore.
self-published
Yeah,
authors. I was on the other side of the desk, fielding queries and,
yeah,
sending out rejections. Sorry. I'm so sorry. It's not fun for either party when that happens too, by the way. Like it was not something that I enjoyed doing. It was just part of my job, unfortunately.
yeah. Oh my god,
But
just breaking up with
oh
dozens
my
of people
God.
a
Yeah,
day.
dozens of people
Like
you
that's
don't
oh
even
my
know.
god.
Oh, the hate
That's,
mail I received.
mm,
But anyway, I digress. It's just good to know, have like you said, like having these parameters
yeah,
and knowing what to avoid can be very helpful if that's what's on your radar. But at the same time, I think having these tropes to rely on,
yeah,
especially if you're just getting started and you think that you want to self-publish and that's the route you want to take, using these can be really effective
Of
because
course.
a reader who is thinking about taking a chance on an indie author might be more receptive to one that relies on something that they already know and love.
Yeah, familiarity.
Yeah,
Just
exactly. Versus trying to go off the wall
right.
and try something completely new and different, which may or may not work all the time.
Yeah.
So I think there's something to be said for that as well.
Of course, not to mention how often do we see genres or tropes in general and these sort of things like they become like cyclical trends,
Yeah,
like things come back and they disappear and they come back. Like how
of
often do you see like
course.
zombie stories like become the most popular thing in the world for a while and then everyone gets sick of them, they die, but guess what, they come back from the dead.
Right.
Like that's what happens, and
Or like, because like the last one on here is like talking about the weather is a no-no. So I think it's very funny. The Harry Potter starts with,
yeah.
Uncle Vernon traveling to work, talking about the weather and all the owls
Yes,
around
well
and
that was,
everything.
yeah.
Like
Yeah,
so
essentially info dumping the whole
it's
family.
exactly
Like,
info dumping the entire
yeah,
family. And it's just like, so there are these great stories that we
of
all know and love
course,
that
of
have these
course.
beginnings. And I understand why the industry might be wanting to like move away and
I think they're giving us those rules to gatekeep and keep us out so we don't use them so our stories don't work.
mayhaps.
I'm kidding, but it's funny because obviously these things. I mean, even like Stephen King, you read on the writing, like you read on writing, and how many of his own rules does he break throughout
Oh,
his work?
constantly. This
And
is
he
like,
knows it.
don't use adverbs. Uses 100
100 adverbs,
adverbs in one paragraph.
exactly. Yeah, he uses them fantastically.
He does.
But it's true. Like they break. The industry constantly breaks all of these rules, and the point is like they're trying to get people not to use it in the worst same cookie cutter way. And
Yes.
then, but the only way they know how to communicate that is just a broad law.
Yep. Yep.
And that just doesn't work for everyone. It
That's
never will.
exactly it. So, long story short, take all of this with a grain of salt and just go with what you feel is right for your story, honestly, because at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. And even using these tropes, if you are going the querying route, may end up getting you an agent.
It might, and
Yeah.
that's the thing.
It's
Like,
harder,
yeah,
but it's possible.
it's fun. And you know what? It might get you the agent that you need.
Yeah.
And not just a random agent that you think you want.
Right. Because
Like,
what do you want more? You want an agent just to have for the sake of having an
or do
agent,
you
or do
want
you
the
want
agent who understands your work,
exactly the one who's
right?
going to champion your story?
Yeah. Because the worst thing we can ever do is find someone who wants to turn our words into their words,
Mm-hmm.
tell our story through their perspective. Because
Yeah.
all we have at the end of the day is our perspective.
Yeah.
Like,
I've actually there's an author that I love and respect very much, Morgan Shamey. Shout out. I love you. She talked about that, how she had an agent, she had an editor, and that editor tried to change her voice and she wasn't about that. And
no.
so she ended up stepping away. And I think that that's it goes back to what I said earlier, like know your worth, know what you want to do with your story, and don't just grab at the first thing that comes your way for the sake of the clout of it, because that's not worth it at the end of the day, I think.
Yeah. At the end of the day, you can't let anyone else have the last word on your first words.
Hey, I'm gonna marry you.
You should.
Yeah. Mm. We're gross, but I like it.
We're not gross. I love you. How are we
Gross.
gross? What are you talking about?
I just mean like for the people at
I'm
home,
gonna
they're like,
edit
what?
that out.
The people at home. I think you should keep it in.
All of that?
That's what she said.
That's how the episode ends.
Roll credits.
Hard cut. Roll credits.
Good.
I love you so much.
I love you.
You're so freaking cute.
Thank you for listening today. Thank you for tuning in and listening about our first lines and first chapters. If you liked what you heard, go ahead and subscribe to our channel and check us out at ORWW Podcast on Twitter. And you can check us both out individually at KT_Carlisle. That's CARLISLE. That is me.
And at Anthony Lafusi, we'll post links below.
Absolutely.
All right, but thank you so much for watching and listening to us. Make sure you tell everyone you know, all of your writerly and readerly friends, that that we're out there trying our best to make this show for everyone. And if you have any editing work, or how should you do that? You're better at that.
Oh yeah. And if you have anything that needs to be edited, if you're going to plan on querying your work, or if you're a self published author that is just looking to polish your pages and get it ready for publication, we can help you out. Just go to www.ktaeditorial.com and we can get started on your project.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. We'll see you next time.